Hey there, welcome back to the channel. It's been a little while since we've had an interview, but I am so excited to share this amazing conversation with you. Today, I'm talking with my friend and also client, Tricia Morgan, and she took my program, Know Your Bliss, and she had quite a transformation with her connection to herself and her body, with her pleasure, with her sexuality. And so she's going to share her story. And we'll also dive deep into a bunch of other subjects like how better sex starts with your connection with yourself, the journey from having no orgasms to being multi-orgasmic and how that is possible for everyone, how to keep expanding and improving your sexual connection in your relationship, no matter where you're starting at right now, why self love is so foundational for experiencing more pleasure, how a self pleasure practice can be a tool for healing and transformation. And we also have a really great discussion about hormonal birth control and the impact that it can have on libido and our connection to ourself. And as a nurse, Tricia shares some really great insights about our cycle and how it's impacted by hormonal birth control. I absolutely loved this conversation, and I have a feeling that you will too. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, then stay tuned. Hi, Tricia.
Hi.
So great to connect with you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice that we're doing this. I feel like you and I have had, similar points of our journey where we both thought that we were asexual at one point.
Yes. Yeah, it really is pretty amazing how mirrored our journeys have been. Um, well, let's start there then. That's a great point to bring up. So I'll just start by saying for anyone who hasn't heard my story before, yeah, there was a point several years ago where I really was not experiencing sexual pleasure. I just wasn't that into sex, even though I loved my partner and I loved connecting with him. I just, with sex, I was kind of take it or leave it. And yeah, I thought, like, maybe I'm just asexual. Maybe I'm just one of those women who can't have an orgasm. And, but then I learned, thankfully, one of my teachers, Kim Anami, her like slogan is every woman can. And she emphasizes this like, your body is capable of having an orgasm. You just have to kind of figure the pathway for you. And so that really helped me just get curious and start exploring. And that's what really led me on this whole journey of sacred sexuality and embodiment and all of this. So I'd love to hear from you what you said that you thought you were asexual. So take me kind of through that history. What were you feeling? What were you thinking? What was your experience of your sexuality?
Yeah, very similar to you. At one point, I just realized that I could probably go years without sex and be okay with it. And I was like, I don't know if that is normal. Maybe it's normal to me, but it didn't feel like it totally aligned with me still. Like I just didn't know where that came from, and it was such a limiting belief, I think, at the time that that was just what I had to accept forever, and obviously meeting you, I realized that that was a limiting belief and there were other ways to kind of open up that avenue, but yeah, definitely, just I don't know, where I was like, "You know what?" I was talking to my girlfriend, I was like, "Yeah, I could, not have sex for, 2 years and be like more maybe forever," and be, okay with that, and it was the same thing, I had a partner and poor John, I love him so much, but I think he's been with me through that, time, basically, the start of our relationship was kind of where that came about, and it was like, oh, just think about, all the things that he's endured with me, yeah, so lovely to have a partner that really, understands and, will help you go through those things and wants what's best for you. But yeah, basically just realizing that and then basically find your work and you introduced me to Kim and Ami, and I did some listening to her podcast, and then shortly after you started your Know Your Bliss course. So then we did a dive into that. I guess brought me to where I am. But looking back, it's so crazy how like, yeah, I wasn't having orgasms. Didn't know really how to have an orgasm in sex. Like I at that point figured out like masturbation techniques that I could get myself to orgasm, but there was no desire to go do that.
Mhm.
And then with a partner though, it was just like I don't really know. Like I didn't really know if I was having or like you once you have a real orgasm, you're like, "Okay, there's no way you missed that." But when you had that, you're like, "Oh, I don't know. Is this it? Like, is this an orgasm?" Like, you don't know the capacity of what's actually possible. Um, so yeah, that's kind of like where it all started for me.
Beautiful. Yeah, I can.
Ron actually went on a walk with you, and he was like, "You have to connect with Cassidy. She literally, like, had the same, like, struggles with you, and she's, like, knows exactly what you're talking about." And it felt pretty isolating at the time for sure, like yeah.
Yeah, you're like, "Aren't I supposed to enjoy sex?" Like, why do most people
It's
seem
really
to be, like,
hard.
all about
Yeah.
having sex?
It was really
Yeah.
hard on the relationship, obviously, because
Mhm.
now it's like sex is like a glue of a relationship, like, to bond with your partner, and it was such a frictional point in our relationship that definitely if John had decided he wanted to leave the relationship at that time, like, I wouldn't even have been surprised or like, I would have just accepted that because I know that that's such a hard aspect that wasn't being met for him in our relationship at that time.
Yeah, yeah, we had a similar struggle, like, even though there was deep love and connection there, it was a point of friction where there is this cycle of course, not wanting more sex, more physical connection, and me, like, wanting to want it.
Yeah, very much wanting to want that. Mhm.
Yes, but then, needing to just honor what I was feeling and just, not having the desire to initiate, not really experiencing much pleasure, and then that led to this cycle of then I would feel kind of guilty, he would feel kind of rejected, and
We had the exact same cycle. Exact same. Yeah.
yeah, I remember, that first walk that Matt and I had with John, we connected it was gonna be more like a business connection, 'cause we both had done the Student Works Painting
What
franchise, and they're both into investing, so we're like, "Oh, this will be a cool connection, let's meet this guy," and yeah, we talked about business maybe 5% of the time, and the other rest of the conversation was all about sex, and John was like, "This is not what I was expecting."
Mhm. But he, like, came home and he's like, "Wow," like, I think it was also probably really refreshing for him to have, like, somebody else who's experienced this because a lot of the times sexual problems in relationships, like, are very, like, hush hush, like, you don't really share that, um, 'cause yeah, I don't know, there's almost like a shame if you're not meeting each other's expectations of that, so you don't really wanna announce that to, like, your closest friends.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of shame and a lot of other stuff that we carry around sexuality, and that's one of the pieces of really important work that we do as we, like, step into our sexual liberation is, like, the de-shaming and the able to have open conversations with especially with our partner, but then with friends, with other people, I think is such an important part of the journey of, like, really embracing the fullness of our sexuality. So, yeah, it's definitely, like, the this is why a conversation like this and sharing this conversation, I feel like it's so important because then somebody else might hear this and realize they might be in a similar situation and realize, "Okay, actually things can change from here. There is a pathway for us to improve our sex life no matter where it's at right now,
Mhm.
better."
And yeah, and it's so crazy, like, where we are now to just be like, "Wow," like, I cannot believe, like, you almost, like, feel sad for your previous self that they, like, endured because it's very painful to have that belief that, like, you're not sexual or you can't give the sex that your partner desires because you're not, like, does even though you love them so much and like I said, like you said, your connection, you just don't have that spark to just go initiate that. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. So let's go there then, and we can dive more into the in between journey afterward. But just kind of to get a snapshot of where you're at now. Um, what's your experience now with sex and pleasure, both for yourself and in your relationship?
Mhm. Like, sex now is just fully, like, orgasmic, like, both of us, and I now have been able to voice what I need for sex, and to me, the way figure out that path of orgasm, and communicate that to my partner and basically tell him what I need to get there. Whereas before I was like, "Oh, like, I don't know if you wanna do that," or, like, I just thought, in a way, like, sex was, like, for him, like, as taboo as that sounds, it's like, yeah, just like, "Okay, I'll have, like, sex with a man, and I don't know, like, my pleasure is second," like, and I just was in that mindset, but John was always, yeah, so good at just making sure that I was also, like, enjoying it, and how can he pleasure me? Um, but yeah, sometimes we have, like, just crazy sexual experiences that we're like, "Okay, this is like a life force. Like, I see how babies are made with this type of energy, like the energy that you can create now, like when you're both so connected and you realize that path of orgasm. And then to the point now that we actually can orgasm like together. And basically either one of us can orgasm like on command. Like we can drag it out, do edging. Edging, I guess you can explain that method probably it's just like you go to like a 8 or like a 7, you don't really go to that 10 right away. So you go in and out of that 8 and then you cool back down to like a 5, go back up to like a 7 for pleasure and cool back down to like a 4 and then finally like when we're ready, we can just get to that 10 like basically on command now. Um so that's been so powerful for our relationship. I definitely like still go back into like the cycle of like, "Oh, I'm tired," like, all the excuses that come up, but just going through the motions and just allowing myself to whatever it is, be okay with that, but still just putting an effort to try to connect. And sometimes you feel tired and then you get going, you're like, "Oh, I actually like this. Like, I'm gonna just keep going down it." Or sometimes you're just like, I'm just, tonight, like, it's just not there for me." But just making that effort and getting past that mindset that just stops you from even trying.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Ooh, so juicy. Thank you for sharing. That sounds delicious and luscious and powerful, right? Like you were talking about when you really tap into that big orgasmic energy and when you can extend your sessions where you're not just going through that initial build and release of energy, but actually doing the edging
Mm.
and taking your time, you get this ability to cultivate so much more of sexual energy and spread it through your body, which is one of the things we practice doing in our own practice in Your Bliss to cultivate and then spread that energy through your body so that it doesn't stay concentrated in the genitals and then feel like it needs to release.
Yeah.
And when you do that, wow, instead of just having this more localized orgasm, which nothing wrong with that, those are great too, but the capacity for your whole body to experience pleasure, like to get these full body orgasms is is huge. And it to me, I don't know about you, but to me it kind of feels infinite. Like you can just keep exploring new
Yeah.
edges and
Yeah.
capacities. Mhm.
Yeah, and see what kinda doors open up and even, like, there's just continuously, like, new types of waves of energy that passes through, and you're like, "Whoa, that was so powerful." Sometimes, yeah, it's just where we get to certain points, we're like, "Whoa, we need to take, like, a minute and just, like, let all that pass. Like, just that energy is so crazy. And, yeah, I think the energy, like, glues you together that you create together.
Mhm. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so then let's kind of rewind and dive a little bit into your journey then from where you started to where you are now. Um, I guess maybe we can talk about when you joined Know Your Bliss. What were kind of the first shifts maybe that you recognized that really helped you to start to open up and, feel more of your pleasure?
I would say definitely, mindset that it was something that you can change, like, that you do have power to, like, cultivate energy within yourself, and also just, the self-pleasure practice, how it's, like, getting to know yourself better, and then you know what to, like, ask for from your partner because you know what you need rather than them just questioning, they're not really sure, they're like, "Do you like this? Do you not?" Um Yeah, definitely like the mindset shift and just going through like those practices that you set up, the meditations, the opening up the heart. And I think there's an aspect of like just surrendering as well into resisting, but just surrendering whatever it is that's coming up to surface during those practices.
Yeah, I think that is such a key transformative piece is surrender and the acceptance because there can be so much pressure around and expectation around
Yeah.
sex and pleasure. And when we can just release that expectation and just instead explore and genuinely be curious,
Curious. Yeah.
accept whatever is arising in our bodies, it totally shifts the way that we relate to our own body and pleasure and sex. I know for me that was a huge shift was just starting with first all I could feel in my body was numbness, right? And the first thing I needed to do was just unconditionally accept and love that experience of numbness. Like, okay, if what I feel right now is nothing, is
Yeah.
numbness, perfect.
Yeah.
Like, whereas before I had been resisting that and feeling like I should be experiencing something different.
Yeah.
And any sort of pressure or expectation we put on our body just will totally shut down.
Yeah, seriously, like, having those expectations and John a lot of times, like, when he would find me in that where it's like, "Okay, I feel like you're too tense because you're trying" like, just he's like, "It's okay, like, we can take our time, like, if it's not there right now, like, that's all good, like, don't need to be somewhere at this exact moment within this experience." Like, that acceptance of where you are and just surrendering to that and yeah, removing the expectations I think is so big to just allowing your body to just be what it is, like do what it is. Yeah.
Exactly, and so practicing that first in our self-pleasure
Mhm.
practice is so helpful because, well, we don't have the added, I guess, like, complexity of a second person and whatever expectation or pressure that might come along with that, and we can just fully focus on our own internal experience, and this doesn't even have to be sexual. This can just start by noticing the sensations in your body, and that's where we start in the program, right? Is like, okay, let's just do a body meditation. Just notice and speak out loud what your body is feeling, just to develop this body-mind connection and to develop a relationship of complete and total acceptance of whatever experience is arising within you right now. And then in that self-pleasure practice, there's no end goal of pleasure or orgasm. It is just an exploration and a connection. It is just a moment to moment what would feel really great right now? What does my body really want? Does this feel good or not? Without any judgment. It's just
Mhm.
like,
Which is so actually difficult to do.
yeah,
Feel like we have a lot of judgment of what we expect from our bodies.
oh yeah.
right now.
Yes, 100%. And also because there's this conditioning, right? Like we see it in movies,
Yep,
TV, porn, if you consume porn, like
yep,
that like, a woman's pleasure should just turn on like that,
yeah.
like on a fire right away. And then it's like 2 minutes later, she's having an orgasm. And it's like,
I know. Yeah.
that can be your experience. And if it is, awesome. And that's generally not what a woman's path of pleasure looks like.
I know, seriously, but you have that, like, societal image, you're like, "Okay, gotta just be on all the time," like, whenever he wants to go, like, I gotta match that right away, or even for self-pleasure practice, it's like, "Okay, I wanna, like, get to an orgasm." I think it's, like, a patience aspect of yourself, like, that you should have that's difficult to cultivate within yourself.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, it definitely takes unlearning, unraveling these conditioning, yeah, perspectives, and that's a lot of the work that we do in Know Your Bliss as well, is, like, literally looking at, "Okay, what beliefs do I have around my body, my pleasure, sex, in general, relationships?" And just to start questioning those, and that is actually so much of the work of of, you know, banding your pleasure, self-love, sexuality. It's just all the unlearning, just coming
Yeah.
to a more true and pure relationship with yourself without all of these bullshit stories in the way. Yeah. Are there any, so you mentioned, the mindset shift of that it actually is possible for you to experience.
Yeah.
Are there any other, like, limiting beliefs or kinda internal roadblocks that you became aware of and overcame?
Yeah, it's definitely another one I think I mentioned before was, like, just, like, the way it was perceived in my household, like, growing up. Um, Being born in, like, a Catholic household, the way sex was seen was very much, like, shameful, don't do it unless you're married, and when my mom did find out that I was sexually active and I pursued, like, birth control method, she was very unimpressed.
Mm.
So that made me kinda be like, "Okay, I gotta just keep this a secret." Um, yeah, so basically unwinding that and developing a refreshing relationship that didn't involve that shame piece, even, like, self-pleasuring practice was difficult, yeah. Yeah, and I wouldn't say I'm fully, like, unwinded yet, like, I've come a long way, but there still is that lingering, like, "Ooh, this feels kinda" I don't know, like, wrong, but
Mhm.
yeah, it's super interesting how long those pathways can take to unwind, but you do make progress. But yeah, that was a big one for me is just accepting just accepting that it wasn't shameful to be enjoying pleasure.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
huge. That's huge, and I think.
And being also, like, talking about it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a story that I would say the majority, if not all, women carry to
Yeah.
be right?
Mhm.
Um, because there is so much secrecy and taboo around sex, and yeah, especially if you come from a more religious household where sex is even seen as sinful, and that's a lot to unpack for sure, and it makes sense that if you grew up that way from birth, right? These are the kind of messages that you're getting right from the time your brain is developing. Like, those are gonna be really deeply wired beliefs that, of course, are
Yeah.
gonna take time like you said, for those pathways to, like, fully demorate, wind, and to create those new pathways, but, yeah, all we can do is keep going.
Keep going, yeah. And just developing your new relationship with, like, I would say religion, I'd introduce it back into my life, but just developing, like, what that relationship will look like for me. Um, and now that I'm married, I can obviously be like, okay, like just to lose that piece. Like, totally. Like, hey, I married God. Like, I do all these things with my partner. It's the glue. But developing those new relationships, though, that, okay, I'm not going to see this as shameful or simple. Just going to embrace and see as the positives that it's intended to like hold us together as a couple. Like that glue is what I've been really like anchored on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, and those, um, especially those family beliefs and narratives,
Yeah.
particularly sticky and powerful
Yeah.
because if you think about it, you know, as a young child, we entirely depend on our family unit for our survival, right? So at the time that these beliefs are forming, there is a true risk to believing anything different than what your family believes. Because there's this underlying like if I am not conforming with my family, I could, be rejected or abandoned. And to that child, it feels like if that happens, I literally will die.
Mhm.
So these stories are also tangled with this just deep need for survival. Like, so when we start to reject or question, unravel these beliefs that we inherited from our family, it kicks up this fear of basically death. Like, if I
Yeah, that's how
reject
deep
these
it
beliefs,
is.
yeah. So that is like a delicate process, and it really requires this foundation of self-love and self-acceptance to be able to feel that fear and shame coming up,
Mhm.
and then to be able to just be present with it
Mhm.
and find a part of ourselves that can hold that feeling with love and acceptance and care. That's how we start to rewire. Like, "Oh, actually, I am safe and loved.
Yeah.
I can be sexual and be safe and loved."
Mhm.
So, yeah, that foundation of self-love is so, so key.
Mhm. Were you referring to, like, the inner child work there?
That is one really powerful tool. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Did you have any particularly, powerful experiences with the inner child process and Know Your Bliss?
Yeah, I would say so, just, like, a lot of the rejections or feelings that I felt as a child were I wasn't loved by certain individuals, just, like, hugging yourself and knowing it's okay, like, you're gonna become an adult, and then you can define, like, your terms of love and what your relationships look like. Um Yeah, definitely the inner child, like, I did that one a few times just and I think that's helped me, like, heal and become whole on a lot of relationships that I have in my life because
Alright.
nobody's life has perfect relationships. We all come up across people that, we wish that things would have been different with certain family members, and I think that work just helps. Just become whole in your relationships so there's no baggage that you're carrying. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. So, I'm curious, as things started to shift for you, did you notice any impacts outside of your pleasure, sexuality, and relationship in any other areas of your life?
I would say it felt more a bit, just, like, lighter and feminine. I
Mm,
was very out of touch with my femininity, like,
mhm.
very, like, a lot of masculine traits of just, like, "This needs to be done now," very, like, task focused, go, 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 go. So, I think definitely just, yeah, being in touch more with, like, the feminine and in my relationship, having that polarization,
Mm,
yeah, became more present, whereas I was very much, like, wanting to cling onto that masculine energy early on in my relationship, so John would hold the masculine energy and I would hold the masculine energy. So there's definitely, like, some clashing there of energies. So just embracing more of my femininity and that like surrendering piece. Yeah.
Hey, just a real quick interruption to ask a little favor of you. If you're enjoying this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, I would be so grateful if you would leave a review for the show. And if you can think of anyone who might get something out of this conversation, please go ahead and share the episode with them and help spread the love. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thanks for being here. What does your femininity mean to you now? How do you relate to that?
Means just like surrender to me. Just like embrace, like accepting things for how they are. Connecting more with myself, rather than like go, 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 go. Just being more in tune to my needs, how I'm feeling, being more in touch with my emotions, in a positive way and not like trying to change them, just accepting them for what they are as they manifest. And also communicating that to my partner. Like a lot of times I would brush that down, put that aside. But I think, yeah, just more like tuning in internally to those emotions and how they just show up.
Mhm. Beautiful.
Mm.
And so okay, beautiful. So you're saying that your sexual practice, as this started to develop, you're just feeling more light in other areas. And do you see any shift, like, when it came to even other relationships or your work or anything like that?
With my work, it's hard to say just because of the profession I'm in. Being in medicine, like, I would say definitely can be a high stress environment, but just having more of, like, zen, just even practicing, like, meditations through your course, like, taking a minute, taking a pause, like, centering yourself, and friendships, I think I'm very open to speaking about sexuality with a lot of my friends. And just kind of none of them have been super receptive to it, but putting that seed there that, like, "Hey, if you ever wanna, like, come talk about this, like, let's go explore that together." Um,
Mm,
yeah. Yeah, I would say definitely just being able to, like, take that moment, like, the meditations aspect that I took away a lot from the course that for work is just taking a breather, resetting, and then friendships just being more vocal about it so people know that if they want to come talk to me about any of these things, any of the struggles, that I'm here and I'm open and
mm.
I'm
That's a
willing to be vulnerable with them. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, we all need friends that we can talk to anything about, so it must be such a gift for them when they're ready, you know?
Well, yeah. Yeah. I would say my circle hasn't fully grown yet within other people in this space. I think you're my only like really connection to someone who's fully dived into this like sexuality, sacred sexuality. But I'm Yeah. So, think more speaking about it more, I guess you would just people would gravitate towards you, or you'd
Mm.
gravitate towards someone else.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so that, like, you mentioned the meditations and just being able to kind of find that centering, being able to take moments throughout the day, and that's a big part of the work in Know Your Bliss is just the mindfulness and the connection with self and the just the, like, moment to moment body mind awareness. So that we instead of, like, go, 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 and instead of being up in our mind and thinking, "Well, I have to do this, I have to do this," and just kind of ignoring our body's needs,
Mhm.
we get to slow down and actually listen to our body's signals so that when our body is needing something, we can take a moment and actually honor that, give it what it needs. And wow, at least for me, that totally changes my experience of life. Like, I'm not
Yeah,
getting
being able to just take a moment to, like, reflect and, yeah, accepting what your body needs. Yeah, absolutely. Because before it's just I feel like a lot of that stuff weighs on you and you don't even realize. Like, all these, like, unaddressed emotions and feelings that are never brought to like, that you never allow to bring to service, so you just suppress, that definitely, like, weighs on you, and it weighs heavily for me on my shoulders, like, I feel that very heavy on my shoulders. So when I can just sit and, like, let that surface and adjust, "Okay, my body's telling me that I need to, like, slow down here." Just
Mhm.
all that weight is just released.
Yeah. So important.
Mhm.
And yeah, unfortunately, it's like normal in our culture to just ignore our bodies and keep going, do what needs to be done. And yeah, just that doesn't feel very good. It feels a lot better when we can just tune into the body and actually feel what it's needing and give it that. So much better.
Yeah, I agree, like, let that just surrender to that 2 minute.
Yeah. So, one of the things you mentioned earlier when you were talking about what shifted in your sex life, the shift from before it feeling like sex was kind of for him and that shift toward like, oh, actually like owning and enjoying your own body, your own experience just for the sake of your own experience and for that shared experience. I wanted to come back to this because I think this is it's it's such a deep, pervasive issue among women. I notice how there's this cultural narrative that women's pleasure is for a man's consumption. And you see this everywhere. So even as an example, you know, people can see a woman dancing and she could be just in her body, fully enjoying the experience of her body moving. There's actually objectively nothing sexual about that. But observers assume that because her body is moving, this must be sexual.
Mhm,
And you see this all the time. So that is, points to this underlying perspective that, yeah, a woman's body, a woman's pleasure is for a man's consumption and enjoyment. And it, like, we don't own our sexuality. We don't own our bodies. And I think this shows up in so many different ways. So this is why I think that reclaiming our pleasure in our sexuality, it's not just about having better orgasms, although that is an amazing thing in itself,
yeah,
but it's also about like reclaiming our authority over our own body and not giving our power away to outside forces.
mhm,
And yeah, so I just wanted to come back
yeah,
and underline that point.
yeah, I agree, like, society definitely, like, makes the yeah, that, like, sex is for the man. I think why I had that strong belief too is because of that feeling that I wasn't enjoying sex as much, and it was more so to keep my partner fulfilled. And I think when I discovered how it could also be just as enjoyable for me and be able to communicate how I would like to be pleasured, that switched. And I think even as a partner, like, it's not as enjoyable having sex with somebody when you know mentally that they're just doing it for you. Like, you want them to kind of embrace their needs and it almost be, like, selfish in bed, and then that's almost where you feel that passion. So, yeah, I think just that lack of pleasure with it, not really just thinking those limiting beliefs brought me to that point where I'm like, "Okay, well, I guess I'll just continue to, like, try to enjoy sex or have sex because that's gonna keep my partner happy."
Mhm.
But discovering how it it can be just as pleasurable for me, like, really, change that dynamic completely.
Yeah, and I think
So I'm, like, a lot of, like, my partner, like, they enjoy like, he enjoys when I'm like, "Okay, like, let's get" like, when I'm enjoying myself, like, it's, like, 1,000 times better when you're like, "Meh, I'm just gonna, like, do this." like it's like a chore mentality, right? Like he'd always say that, like, I don't want this. And it's so obvious to your partner too. It's like when they feel that you're doing something as like a chore, like something to check on your list to keep your partner satisfied, then you doing it because you want to be connected and you're actually enjoying it.
Yeah, totally different energy.
Yeah, like the chore mentality definitely was a term that was in our relationship for a
Yeah.
while. He's like, I feel like sometimes you're doing this like a chore. And I'm like, it's frustrating. He's like, I don't know what else to do. Like,
You're like, "I kinda am, but I."
right, but I also love you. I love you and I want to make sure that your needs are filled. So I'm really trying to get there with you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, so from my experience, in a lot of women that I've talked to and that I've coached, this is a really common experience of feeling like I think there's also this underlying cultural myth that in general, men want sex more than women, and men are more sexual than women. And so there is this thing that happens where women think like, okay, well, I'll just do it to keep him happy. And it's not really as much for their own enjoyment. But one of the things, and there's a really great podcast interview that we did a few years back with Susan Bratton. So anyone who's interested in diving into sex more, definitely check out that episode. And one of the things that she talked about that just made so much sense to us was like, if so, a woman is like a pot of water, and a man is like a stove. So the stove, you can turn it on and it's like hot right away, burning hot. That pot of water though, it's gotta sit. It you gotta add a little heat.
I love
I black heat. Like, well, nothing much is happening, you just got and then eventually it starts to simmer and it starts to boil and it can keep boiling in time. And unfortunately unfortunately, what happens is a lot of people just don't give themselves the time for that pot of water to boil. So it takes women longer in general, for
Mhm.
most women, takes them longer to get to the point of orgasm than it does for a man. A man can get there in as little as, a couple of minutes. A woman's body just takes longer to warm up and to cultivate that pleasure, often more like 20 minutes or even
Mhm.
longer, depending on your body. And so, if it takes a woman's body, say 20 minutes to get to the point of really yummy pleasure and orgasm, and on average, people are having sex for like 7 minutes, which blows my mind. And of course, it's not going to be pleasurable experience for
Yeah.
the woman.
Yeah.
There's just not enough time for her body to really get into that space because also as women, like it kind of requires us to get into that space of surrender and relax. Yeah, really getting into our body, and that takes some time, especially if you've had some stress from the day, if you've been running around, like, geez, it could take 10 minutes just to
Unwind.
your mind settle down and get into your body. So I think so many women that believe that they just aren't that into sex, one of the biggest obstacles is they're just not taking the time that they really need.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which also comes down to, like, planning, though, I know was big for us, 'cause, like, schedule-wise, like, we both work. Like, I work whatever, the 8-hour Monday to Friday kinda job, and John's always can work the whole day or whenever I tell him I need him to be available, he'll be available. But he can work 24 hours if he wanted to. But so for me, like, personally, like, I actually need to be, like, mentally, like, scheduling or even is actually writing it down on a calendar, which I know a lot of people have opinions about this, like, "Oh, you shouldn't have to schedule sex." And then I don't know who said this to me, but it's like, if you don't like, whatever's on your calendar is what's important to you. So I don't know if that was you or if it was podcast. I'm not sure, but it's not on my calendar or like just intimacy or like John time, like
Mm.
a 2 hour block. Then it's just to get to that point. It's like, okay, now we have to be fast. It's like our bedtime. And already mentally, I was winding down for bed, but now we're going to try to have intimacy. Okay. Then, yeah, it has to be fast. And then you might have not as good of an experience because you try to go through with it anyways. And it's just not as pleasurable as if you like allotted that time to cultivate that energy and that time to get there that you need to just unwind that mind, to really surrender, to let your body just like feel what's in your body. Um, but yeah, and John, it's funny because before I used to be like, "Oh, this is something we have to do. We have to schedule it." And he's like, "It's exactly that hot the pot versus like the kettle." Like he's like, "Oh no, like you just tell me. Like I don't need to schedule it. Like I can just good whenever."
Good to go anytime.
I mean, yeah, if that's what you need, like do it. Like by all means, like, do that, and then I will be there with you. Like no problem. That really knows the difference, right? But you exactly what you just shared of the time, the water difference, how long it takes one to boil versus the other.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I am a huge proponent, big fan of scheduling sex, and I know it doesn't sound sexy, but what think about this, what is sexier? When you have 2 hours that you've set aside where you know there's nothing else you need to do, where you can just take your time to have covered, connect, massage each other, like just have the spaciousness for a luscious, connected experience. What's sexier, that or getting to the end of your day and feeling exhausted and being like, should we have sex? I don't know, tired. Like,
That's the default for most people. Like, definitely, if that intentionality isn't there, like, that is definitely, like, my default. Like, after a long day, come home, cook dinner, I'm like, "I'm exhausted."
yeah.
Right? So it's, like, just that mentality that, like, being intentional about it and even whatever you say, like, for me, I like to say intimacy. Like, I'll schedule intimacy or John.
I like that too because it takes the pressure off, right? Again, with that approach of no expectations,
Yeah.
uh, just having that time for intentional intimacy. Connect. I look want to have another program specifically for this called the Conscious Intimacy Program.
Oh, yeah.
That is the whole point of that program is to help you cultivate that intentional connection time that is specifically for intimacy and potentially sex if that is what, arises. But it's all about like, yeah, taking off the expectations and finding new ways to connect to grow your intimacy. But yeah, I 100% agree that if it's not in your calendar, then it's probably not that important. And yeah, so if you're not currently scheduling sex, give it a try.
Yeah.
Have
And if it's not for you and you can just be on whenever, and, like, that's great too, but for someone like myself, like, I definitely need to be intentional about it. Um, so that's kinda yeah, what works.
And it doesn't mean that you can't have spontaneous
Yeah.
sex.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's not that it's like, "Oh, nope,
It's
we
only
aren't
this.
scheduled
Yeah,
right
yeah,
now,
yeah, yeah, for
sorry."
sure, yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
if you wanna
definitely.
have just, like, a hot quickie in the middle of the day,
Yeah,
awesome. That's
yeah, yeah,
always an option.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I agree.
Amazing. Okay, so kind of switching gears here, you mentioned before we got started that you wanted to talk about birth control and your experience with being on birth control, coming off of it, and what you noticed was the impact on your sexuality. So tell me about your experience with that.
Yeah, this is like a I think this one goes wait. I think this everything that I've just said, birth control alongside affected every single aspect of that story
Mhm.
as well. So I got on birth control when I was 18. Like I said, mom was super unimpressed. sexually active. Okay, not gonna talk about it. Just gonna take it. Don't wanna complain about it, nothing. So, I think, looking back, I when I totally felt like I lost my sexuality, um, that was, like, the peak of when birth control would have been becoming me, because it changes you. It is a hormone profile, and it does. Your hormones make up who you are, so it changes you, absolutely, I believe that. I believe it fully changes you, and there's tons of research to back that up. Um
Just to interject here, can you tell us a little bit about what birth control does to your hormones? You're a nurse, right? So I'm assuming we can talk about this a little bit.
Yeah. So when you take birth control, you do not ovulate. So it suppresses your hormones, and it doesn't allow you to release a hormone called progesterone. And progesterone is actually a chill hormone. So women naturally have that progesterone at the end of our cycle before we have our period. So we feel a little bit more zen and just more chilled out. That's the intention of it. And that allows us to ovulate. And when you're on certain types of birth control, I don't want to say all, because if you take like a copper IUD, even some hormonal IUDs, you do have ovulatory cycles. But the pill in specific has a synthetic version of progesterone. So you don't actually make that progesterone chemical. So you don't ovulate the whole time. Mhm. Which also makes me reflect back on being on birth control. I would not have any fluctuations in mood. So that change of like estrogen dominance versus progesterone dominance gives you that cycle, the ebbs and flows that they would say of a hormonal cycle. But not having that progesterone, you're basically estrogen dominant, and a lot of the times birth control is a low dose estrogen, so it's not even your full peak of a woman who is not on birth control. So you can be basically the same mood for an entire 28 days. And then you have a break in that cycle. It's not a period, which I always knew that term. It's not a period, but I didn't even know what that meant.
Yeah, so from my understanding, you don't even actually have to take a break from the birth control pill. The only reason that they do the whole sugar pill thing is just to make it feel a little bit
Feel
more normal.
psychologically,
Yeah,
yes, for
but you don't
women.
have to have a bleed
Yeah.
at all.
And
Yeah.
it's absolutely true, like, psychologically, I was like, "I don't wanna not ever have a bleed, like, that doesn't seem right." Like, so as a woman, intuitively, like, we know that we should have a bleed at the end of a cycle, like, we know. And, yeah, doctors would say, "Oh, you don't need this," but I didn't actually have the understanding of what that meant. So I continued to take my withdrawal like, stop my birth control for the I went down to 5 days. They're like, "Oh, you don't need to do a full 7." So I went down to 5 days and would have, like, this withdrawal bleed, not a period. You do not ovulate. Um, yeah, so that's kinda, I guess, like, the whole rundown of, like, the hormone aspect, but the huge thing is, yeah, that you don't ovulate, so you don't have that fluctuation, your ebbs and flows. So I can feel the same every single day that I'm taking a hormonal pill. Some pills do titrate the dose, but the one I was on very early, like the same hormonal dose every single day. So when I came off, I was definitely starting to feel those ebbs and flows. And I was someone who was like, go, 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 gym, workout, 5 a.m., 5 days a week, gotta grind, like, gotta get on that gym before work, all the things. So when I came off, I was like, and when I actually could feel those ebbs and flows. The week that I was progesterone dominant, I was the back end of your cycle. I was like, "Man, like, I just wanna prioritize my sleep today."
Yeah.
It was very obvious to me that I didn't have that, like, that I needed just some more rest
Yes.
for those weeks. Super, super interesting to just, like, let that manifest and come to surface, like, "Oh, I actually, like, wanna do something different today, like Pilates, something less intensive and more flow-like, rather than, like, going to the gym and weightlifting." And I think there is Some people who talk about different types of exercise for different parts of your cycle. I
Yeah,
haven't
there's
done
a
it.
really great book I recommend called
Yeah.
The Flow by Elisa Vitti, and she talks about cycle syncing, talks about, how to eat and move, during different parts of your cycle to best align with your energy.
Yeah.
So it's really I highly recommend that book, but I mean, ultimately, it comes down to I think the best guide is just feeling
You.
what
Yeah.
feels good today and honoring
Yeah.
that.
But
Yeah.
on the pill, like, for me, there was no what feels good today. I felt
Mhm,
the same every day,
mhm,
and I felt almost like a numbing effect that I was pretty numb, and I think that translated to that sexuality of having total numbness.
yeah.
Yeah, even, like, my emotions. Like, there was times where John and I would be in really intense, like, conversations, and there would be tears shed, and I would not feel anything. It was
Mm.
scary. Like, I was like, "I'm staring at you, I'm hearing all the words you're saying, I can see all the emotions you have, and I, like, don't feel anything." It's really terrifying. You're like, "Am I a psychopath?"
Yeah.
Like, honestly, there were times that it crossed my mind. I was like, "Am I a psychopath right now? Like, this is insane."
Yeah. Totally, and, like, you talked about before how earlier on in your relationship, John was embodying that masculine energy, and you were also embodying that masculine energy, and that's not surprising given what's actually happening in the body when you're on hormonal birth control.
Yeah.
You aren't getting that cycle, and the cycle is really, like, at the heart of feminine energy.
Yeah.
Like, to be embodying feminine energy is to be in alignment with the cycles of nature. That is something that is so unique about being a woman is that we are cyclical, and this gives us this ability to tap into different aspects of our energy, like you said, that more inward phase in the second half of our cycle when our progesterone rises and we start to turn inward, like, we get more reflective. We often will be feeling very intuitive and very driven this time. It gives us access to a different aspect of ourself that I feel is, like, where a lot of our wisdom comes from.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I can totally relate when I was on hormonal birth control. I was, yeah, just living that life of, like, trying to be consistent, essentially being in that masculine energy of showing up every day, doing the same thing, go, go, go. And when I came off of birth control, even though I didn't have a cycle then for years, it was like for
Oh
4 or 5
gosh. Yeah, it
years,
takes so long, yeah.
which isn't surprising again because what was happening in my body is low progesterone.
Mhm,
And if I had been giving my body synthetic progesterone
mhm.
for that many years,
And you weren't making any, yourself.
I wasn't making it myself. So, of course, my body is like, I guess we don't need to make progesterone anymore. And
So
so then,
figuring it out again is so, like, a shock.
yeah, so it took my body 4 or 5 years, 5 years, I think, to figure out the process of making all these hormones help again before my cycle returned to normal. And I think that's just something that we are not warned about as teenagers, getting prescribed birth control from our doctor. I don't know about you, but I didn't get any of these disclaimers like, "Hey, guess what? Your sexual libido
Veto, basically.
basically non-existent."
Yeah.
And guess what? It might take you many years after coming off of birth control to have a regular cycle, and you might take a long time to be able to conceive.
Yeah.
These things just are not told to us. We're not given that warning or even alternatives, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because now that they've been off, like, there's so many natural methods that are just as effective, but they're not introduced, like the fertility. awareness method where you can temperature track. Um, it's actually super fascinating. I don't know, have you done that at all?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I tried, but again, with all of my regular cycles, it was difficult, but, like, yeah, you can measure your temperature, your cervical fluid, the position of your cervix, if it's high or low, and all of these things together give you a very accurate picture of where your cycle is. Avoid that time in your cycle where you're actually
Fertile.
able to conceive, fertile, yeah.
Yeah, and then or able if you don't wanna conceive where it would be risky to have non-protected sex, but it's so fascinating the body how your temperature rises with progesterone, and it stays elevated that thereafter until you have a period, and the day of your period, it drops. So fascinating. I was observing that here, um, yeah, just before we conceive, but yeah, it was super, super fascinating to just, like, observe that, like, progesterone, like, "Whoa," and then yeah, but definitely for me, the biggest thing I would say is just, like, numbness, like, everywhere
Mm.
that I noticed when I came off, like, John noticed, he's like, "You have, like, so much more." He's like, "You're just like a social Sally now." Like, I was so just like, I was so, like, introverted, got so into myself, like, just being alone. So, like, yeah, just isolating myself from a lot of people over the time, and then as soon as I came off, it was like, "Wow, gonna go, like, make friends, I need all these new girlfriends, gonna go be active," and John's like, "Who are all these people that you're, like, hanging out with now?"
Well, yeah, 'cause there's that estrogen day when we're in that ovulatory phase that just like, woo, we wanna get out there and, like, be social and do the things, and we don't get that from birth control.
And it's sad though because I can remember myself before it, because pieces of me before have come back that I didn't even like, it makes me sad that that just slowly faded away, and like I said, it just becomes your baseline existence, and it
Yeah,
doesn't it still doesn't feel right for you.
yeah,
When just something is not aligned, that it doesn't feel like you, but it's your baseline.
yeah.
That
Yeah, I definitely felt that way, and I just got to this point where I was like I was being so intentional with everything else I put into my body, what I was eating, everything I was
yeah,
putting into my body, and there's just this one thing, these hormones that I'm taking every day, I'm like, "This just does not feel right." Like,
such
I
a
can't
blind spot, though. I don't know, for me, it was. I don't know if it was for you.
'cause we're so it's a fish in water, right? It's just so was so normal. I was a teenager, all of my friends went on birth control.
Same.
It was just like a thing that you do. I nobody was talking about something like fertility awareness method. That was not even presented as an option at any point. And then, like in high school, phys ed class or health class where they just scare you and
Yeah,
you have to be on birth control because you can get pregnant anytime.
yeah.
You can get pregnant when you're bleeding and, like, just all of this fear, 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 and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't wanna have a baby when I'm 19 or 18," like
Yeah, so it serves a role, not to say that obviously it's all bad. There's a time and place, I think, for some women, like, I think for sure it's allowed me to get my education and be not to stress about that, but I think it just having that awareness of, okay, when you're at a point to get off and it doesn't feel right, take that jump, like, don't just keep going because it's, like, what you're used to, you've been taking it for so long already, so why not just continue? Um, yeah, one of my girlfriends such a blind spot, one of my girlfriends that I guess had met, um, through after coming off birth control, going out, and she was like, "Yeah, you eat so healthy, you, like, go work out, like, you do all these things, but, like, you're still on birth control, like, why?" And
yeah.
it was that moment where I was like, "Well, 'cause I don't wanna get pregnant?" And she's like, "Well, there's, like, other ways." Like, she was the one who introduced me to the fertility awareness method, and I was like, "That still sounds risky." And she's like, "No, like, I can actually see in my cycle, like, where I ovulate, I actually know myself, so I have all these other symptoms as well. Like, we usually take a week break from that time, so we give ourselves the time. So she's like, "I've been doing this for, like, 3 years, so it's working out for me." And then I was like, "Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna, like, read about this." So I just read a few books. Your Brain on Birth Control, Sarah Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Have you read that one?
I haven't, but I've heard her interviewed, and I really
Yeah, that one was basically the one for me that I was like, "This has been a blind spot in my life for the past 5 years, basically."
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, it's not that nobody should ever take hormonal control. Not what we're getting at. It's for just it's so important to actually know what's happening,
Yeah.
uh, and to be able to then make an informed decision. And I think that's where the big gap is, that the fact that you can walk into a doctor's office at whatever age, like sometimes 14, 15, 16, and just ask for birth control, and they just write you a prescription, no questions asked, without really telling you any of the risks. I think that is the problem.
Mhm.
That, you know, of course, a woman has the right to make that choice to go on to hormonal birth control if that's what feels right for her,
Yeah.
but she should know what the risks are and what kind of changes she can expect in her body and in her emotions and her mood, all of these things.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so hopefully this starts to become more of a
I
point
think
of conversation.
I
And I
hope so too, yeah, like, yeah, even I'm so grateful though for you and your course, because even though I had that, like, numbness, that I think obviously there's so many factors, but I do think that birth control was a factor there. I was able to develop some skills and learn to get to know my body, that I was able to still advance my sexuality and my relationship through that. And then when I came off, it was like the veil, like the last piece, like that veil. I'm wanting to fully just open up this avenue, and really now I'm like, also a huge thing I had actually that I think a lot of women might be shameful of is I had pain with intercourse
Mhm.
for the longest time, and that's kind of that baseline pace that you just accept as normal. I just we did things that, like, we had longer foreplay, like, we did things that allowed me to enjoy sex through that, but it did start off painful for, like, a good, like, 2 or 3 years there, and
Mhm.
coming off, that was one thing I noticed. I was like, "I literally don't have pain with sex." And, they always say, like, pain with sex is not normal, but you're like, "Well, this is what I am, like, I don't have any other symptoms, so I guess this is just normal for me because it's not like I have any other weird symptoms, but just that thinning of your uterus and your uterine lining with the hormonal birth control that really actually affected me. I didn't even know. And that honestly, like, I could cry if I wanted to, like, go into the emotions that caught, like, that's a struggle, like, having pain in intercourse for, like,
Oh, yeah.
3 years, pushing through it, but then getting off and realizing that was actually due to this thing I was taking, and my body actually has the capacity to enjoy this and not have
Mm.
that be my baseline anymore. So, yeah, that was that veil, 'cause now it's like, "Oh, wow, we don't have pain anymore, like, it's all just pleasure, like, it's all so great."
Oh, hallelujah.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah. So with, you said the hormonal birth control causes a thinning of the uterine lining. So also with the cervix is thinning, would that be what's causing the pain, do you think?
Wouldn't wanna say yes or no because I don't know 100%, so I wouldn't wanna be, like, saying the wrong information.
Yeah.
Um, but something in there felt it, like, it felt like definitely felt it. And, yeah, John noticed too, like, the way things, like, felt after and before. So, potentially cervix thinning, I
Yeah, it makes sense. Whatever it is that is causing the pain, like just the fact that the natural rise and fall of hormones that are optimal for the health of your whole reproductive system,
yeah.
that's happening. Of course, there's going to be impacts. Like these things aren't in a vacuum. You can't just stop ovulation and then not have any other
Else.
effects. It's a whole delicate system. So, of course, there'll be other impacts. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've covered a whole ton of ground here. And I think as we move toward wrapping up, one of the things I'd love to ask you is if you could give one message to all women everywhere, like if you could put this message on every billboard, TV station, radio station, and just broadcast it everywhere, what would that be? What do you want women to know?
If your baseline status doesn't align with the full version of you that you desire, change it. Like, go after it and demand more for yourself. Because you can unlock new portals that your baseline can just only get better. But I think, yeah, don't the limiting belief that this is my baseline forever will keep you there forever. But believing and demanding that there can be more for you, opens up all the portals that you can get more.
Woof, goosebumps. I love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Really connected with that word baseline because of all these things that I was experiencing for so long that just through through your work, through just other studies that I've done and improvements I've made in my life to just change those pieces for better. Mhm.
yum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it just like you said, it just starts with this, like, seed planting, just knowing that it's possible.
Mhm.
I hope
Exactly.
that anyone listening, no matter what your current experience is of your connection with yourself, with your body, your pleasure, your sexual experience, no matter where you are right now, even if things are, like, pretty great, it can get better,
Yeah.
and so why not go after it?
Mhm.
Why not?
Yeah, definitely, why not?
I don't plan to ever stop
Yeah.
exploring the possibilities of my inner world, of my pleasure, because every time I do and I, like, find new doors, new portals, I have amazing magical experiences, and it opens up just more richness in my life, more one thing Matt and I like to say is it just adds more sparkle to life. Like, when things are really in flow and we're just really in that, yeah, juicy flow of our sexual energy, everything just is more smooth and sparkly.
Mhm. I
And
agree.
I'm always curious, like, what else is possible?
Yeah.
What else is there? What else? Like, we're infinite beings. Let's keep exploring.
Yeah. Yeah, to just keep exploring.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, Tricia. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking with you and diving into all these amazing topics. Anything?
It was a lot of fun. I also love listening to you because you obviously have done so much work in this space. So anytime I would say something and you would elaborate on other things, connect that to just things that you've learned or you studied, I love that. Just expansion.
Mhm.
Yeah. I can
Yeah.
obviously see the work that you've done in this space. So thank you for being you.
No, I appreciate that. Thank, thank you
Yeah.
for
And
being
let me
you.
know when your
So
next
grateful.
course gets
I will for
launched and I
you.
will love to.
Yeah, actually, it is coming very, very soon. Know Your Bliss 2.0, new and improved. So I'm really excited about that. And we're doing it a slightly different way this time. So we're going to have a self paced study. So it'll be all pre recorded lessons and self paced, and with the option of adding on the group coaching alongside it. And actually, just before we wrap up, when you went through Know Your Bliss, we had the group coaching weekly.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just curious what your experience was just being in that group coaching container and witnessing other women. What was that like for you?
I Fortunately, I was only able to actually make it to one of the sessions because I think they were on the weekends, and my schedule at the time was shift work, so I was like day, day, night, night. So a lot of times it was happening, like, it just happened to fall like, the time frame just happened to fall when I was either working on the weekend or sleeping on the weekend. But the one I did attend, I remember going through her pathways, and it was helpful because I was almost able to, like, go through those emotions with all of like, you and her, and I thought it was great, even though it wasn't, like, my personal coaching session. I think
Mhm.
still just listening to somebody else be vulnerable and doing a meditation and going through it with them, I think I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, I always find when I get in those group spaces, I learn so much from other people.
Yeah. For listening, yeah.
So much of it is universal, and so when I'm someone's going through their own process, like, I can find some aspect of that within myself that I might not have even been aware of otherwise,
Yeah. It's
which
also
is really
interesting
cool.
listening to other
So
people's, thought
mhm.
processes, because they definitely like, a lot of times you'll learn a different pathway to explore something or dive into something. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
amazing. Well, alright. Thank you once again, Tricia.
Yeah.
It was great
Yeah,
to
thanks
see
for
you.
having me, this was fun.